May I speak in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lovely to be with everybody, either virtually or in person. Today, calls and challenges. This Sunday, we begin an unusually long march from Candlemas to Lent. Ash Wednesday, as I checked yesterday, isn't until the 2nd of March. So there's lots of time between dry January and New Year's resolutions to get back to enjoying the odd glass and a fair amount of chocolate before the beginning of March. Snowdrops are out, other bulbs are appearing already. Spring has been in the air, apart from sleet yesterday, rain today, and high winds today. The daylight hours are lengthening, and COVID isn't especially worrying at the moment. Today's three readings are all pretty familiar, I think. The prophet Isaiah's vision of the Lord in the temple. Paul recalls the encounters with the risen Jesus after the resurrection to various disciples individually and in groups, and eventually to himself. Luke's gospel tells of the calling of Peter, James, and John at the Lake of Galilee. Each of these stories refers to life-changing events for the individuals and groups concerned. They experience overwhelming, miraculous events, and these are crucial in convincing them that God is summoning them to a different life of preaching, prophesying, serving, or witnessing to others. Reading these very familiar stories again, I started to reflect on what these people's lives might have been like beforehand. Did Isaiah hang out much at the temple before his amazing vision of the Lord and his terrifying attendants, the seraphs? Was he hanging around looking for a challenge? Or was he just casually passing through before he received this ultimately frustrating commission from God? Because he was told to preach to a people who were absolutely not going to listen. Were Paul's bouts of persecution of the first Christians not just due to his zeal for what he thought the Jewish faith should be, but because he was getting a bit stuck in a rut with tent making? Were Peter, James, and John frustrated with their lives as fishermen? And Jesus' call to them to follow found them ready to move on to a new challenge. Certainly, at the beginning of the story of the Gospel, we meet Peter, James, and John on the shore, rather despondently washing their nets. As the story makes clear a few verses later, they've just had an unsuccessful night fishing and they're performing essential chores before heading home. Jesus turns up and asks for the use of one of their boats, and presumably they have nothing to lose by letting him preach from it. Afterwards, Jesus tells them to try fishing again. And that must have been quite annoying if they'd just washed and put the nets away, and this advice from a non-fisherman too. There's a huge net-breaking catch. Presumably there were no fishing quotas on the Sea of Galilee at that time. And the three of them are convinced that this man is not just a carpenter's son, an eccentric preacher. There's something much more. So their apparently snap decision to leave their business and follow Jesus is a tantalizing suggestion in the gospel that they weren't just overwhelmed by the miracle and his authority. Maybe they were also ready to be called without actually being aware of it. I've been reading, rather slowly because it's last thing at night, a book about the stages in the lifelong journey of faith. The authors talk about how we can get stuck at a particular spiritual stage, sometimes for years. What the factors are that cause us to get stuck or even drop out of faith for a while. And how we might move on to the next developmental stage of the journey. The pandemic has perhaps caused many of us to feel stuck. We've battened down our personal and spiritual hatches to weather out the lockdowns and illness and loneliness that went on and on and on. way beyond what any of us could have possibly expected back in March 2020. Of course, it may not have ended either. Other difficulties may also have surfaced in our lives during that period, in employment or health or finances or relationships. Just meeting those every day, every week challenges has taken a lot out of us and our spiritual resources. And of course, it continues to do so. But I do sense that something may be stirring, that as a church and as individuals, we may be on the brink of hearing a new call to the next stage of our journey. May we therefore be able to pray, "Here I am, send me." Amen.